Few weapons have shaped the psychology of war quite like the ones in this episode. From a simple truck-mounted rocket launcher that terrified German soldiers on the Eastern Front, to intercontinental missiles capable of ending civilization within 30 minutes, Soviet rocket and missile technology evolved at a pace that repeatedly caught the rest of the world off guard. Some of these weapons were crude and improvised, built in desperation during the darkest days of a losing war. Others were the product of decades of careful, secretive engineering, designed not to win a battle, but to guarantee that no battle involving them could ever truly be won. This is the story of Soviet firepower, from the Katyusha to the ICBM. And it's a story that says as much about human ingenuity as it does about human fear. Our story begins in the summer of 1941, in the earliest, most desperate weeks of the German invasion. On July 14th, near the town of Orsha, a Soviet artillery battery under the command of Captain Ivan Flyrov unleashed a weapon German troops had never encountered before, a truck-mounted rack of unguided rockets that could saturate an entire target area in a matter of seconds. The weapon was officially designated the BM-13, but Soviet soldiers gave it an affectionate nickname that would become legendary: Katyusha, after a popular wartime song about a girl waiting faithfully for her soldier to return home. German troops, on the receiving end of its distinctive howling shriek as dozens of rockets launched almost simultaneously, coined their own far less affectionate name for the weapon: Stalin's organ, a reference to the eerie, organ pipe-like sound of the rocket rails and the terrifying wall of fire that followed. Soviet high command understood immediately what they had, and moved swiftly to keep the weapon's design a closely guarded secret, going so far as to order crews to destroy their own launchers rather than risk one falling into German hands. The Katyusha's genius lay entirely in its simplicity. Unlike conventional artillery, which require heavy, difficult-to-move guns and lengthy setup times, a Katyusha battery could be mounted on the back of an ordinary truck chassis, driven into position, fire an entire volley of rockets within seconds, and then disappear before enemy artillery could ever pinpoint its location and return fire. It was cheap to produce, simple enough to be manufactured in factories that had never built weapons before, and devastatingly effective when massed in large numbers against troop concentrations. Its psychological impact on the receiving end was almost as significant as its physical destructive power. Entire German units reported soldiers fleeing in panic at the mere sound of the launch. By the war's end, tens of thousands of Katyusha launchers had been produced and deployed across every major Soviet offensive, from the defense of Moscow to the final battle for Berlin, cementing rocket artillery as a permanent and central fixture of the Soviet way of war for decades to come. Somewhere beneath the frozen plains of Kazakhstan and southern Russia, buried under meters of reinforced concrete, a weapon once waited that could, on its own, and the existence of 10 major cities in a single launch. NATO gave it a name meant to convey pure terror: Satan. The Soviets called it the R-36, later the R-36M. And to this day it remains the largest, heaviest intercontinental ballistic missile ever built by any nation on Earth. This is the story of how the Soviet Union built the ultimate doomsday weapon, and why, even decades after the country that created it ceased to exist, its shadow still looms over global nuclear strategy. By the early 1960s, the Soviet Union had already proven it could build intercontinental missiles. The R-7 had launched both the world's first ICBM and the first satellite. But the R-7 was slow to fuel, difficult to hide, and vulnerable to a surprise first strike. Soviet military planners drew a hard lesson from the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Whoever could guarantee a devastating response, even after absorbing an enemy's first strike, would hold the real advantage in nuclear deterrence. That lesson set off a design race within the Soviet military-industrial complex, one aimed not just at building missiles that could reach America, but at building missiles that could survive an attack, launch quickly, and carry an overwhelming amount of destructive power in a single strike. The task fell largely to designer Mikhail Yangel and his design bureau in Dnipropetrovsk, a rival to Sergei Korolev's own missile programs. Yangel's team developed the R-36, first entering service in 1967, a heavy, silo-based missile using storable liquid propellants, meaning it could sit fueled and ready inside its silo for years, cutting launch preparation time down from hours to mere minutes. This was a critical advantage over earlier designs, which required lengthy fueling procedures that left missiles dangerously exposed and slow to respond in a crisis. The R-36 quickly became the backbone of the Soviet strategic rocket forces and Yangel's design philosophy, emphasizing survivability, readiness, and raw destructive capacity, would define Soviet heavy missile development for the rest of the Cold War. Central to the entire concept was the silo itself, a deep, heavily reinforced underground structure engineered to withstand the shockwave and heat of a nearby nuclear detonation, giving the missile inside a genuine chance of surviving an enemy first strike and launching in retaliation. Soviet engineers scattered these silos across vast, remote stretches of territory, spacing them widely enough that a single incoming warhead couldn't destroy multiple missiles at once. This silo-basing strategy, combined with rapid launch, storable fuel missiles, formed the technical foundation of what strategists on both sides called mutually assured destruction, the grim guarantee that any nuclear first strike would trigger an equally devastating response, making nuclear war, in theory, unwinnable for either side. The SS-18's existence became one of the central concerns driving American nuclear strategy throughout the late Cold War, cited repeatedly in debates over the American MX missile program and broader concerns about a so-called window of vulnerability. It also became a central figure in arms control negotiations, explicitly named and limited under the SALT II agreement in 1979 and later addressed directly in the START I Treaty signed in 1991, which mandated significant reductions in the number of SS-18s the Soviet Union, and later Russia, was permitted to keep in active service. One of the clearest examples of a single weapon system shaping the entire architecture of nuclear diplomacy. Yet even as intermediate-range missiles dominated headlines, the true centerpiece of Soviet strategic power remained its intercontinental ballistic missile arsenal, and no weapon in that arsenal loomed larger, quite literally, than the R-36, known to NATO by a chillingly appropriate codename, Satan. Entering service in its most advanced form during the early 1980s as the SS-18, this missile was, and remains even in Russian service today, the largest and heaviest ICBM ever built by any nation on Earth. A single SS-18 could carry up to 10 independently targetable nuclear warheads, each one capable of separating from the main missile body and striking its own distinct target with devastating precision, meaning one launch could theoretically eliminate 10 separate cities simultaneously. The sheer scale of the Soviet ICBM fleet, numbering in the hundreds of missiles by the height of the 1980s, became the ultimate physical expression of the doctrine of mutually assured destruction that defined the entire nuclear standoff between the two superpowers. Taken together, the Katyusha, the R-7, the SS-20 and the SS-18 tell a single continuous story. A nation that transformed a crude but effective rocket barrage into a nuclear arsenal capable of annihilating human civilization many times over, in less than half a century. It's a story that reflects both remarkable engineering achievement under extraordinary pressure and the genuinely terrifying logic of an arms race, in which each side's search for security ultimately produced weapons capable of ending all security, for everyone, permanently. If you're finding value in this journey through Soviet military history,